Joe Pesci was not born to stand out, but Hollywood had no choice but to remember him. A man barely 1.63 meters tall, who once made a living cutting hair and playing guitar in bars, became a symbol of ferocity, solitude, and genius. When Pesci shouted, "Funny how?" in Goodfellas, the audience shivered, not just because of the violence, but because they felt the pain of a man who had spent his life being underestimated. Few people know that before holding the Oscar statue, he had been shut out from every door. His debut album failed. His first acting role went unnoticed, and there was a time when Pesci gave up acting altogether, returning to manage a restaurant just to survive. But destiny called his name, and he answered with everything he had once lost. After a series of grueling performances, he chose to disappear at the very peak of fame, when glory surrounded him. At 82, Joe Pesci lives quietly by the New Jersey shore, playing golf, strumming his guitar, and staying far from the cameras. He needs no more glory and seeks no justification. While many stars struggle to cling to their fading spotlight, Pesci steps back into silence, as if silence itself were the only way to preserve his dignity. The story of Joe Pesci is not just the journey of a cinematic legend, but a beautiful tragedy about the price of art, about the loneliness of a man who chose honesty in a noisy world. Because sometimes the loudest applause is not the greatest reward. The true reward is the right to disappear in the very moment you shine the brightest. Perhaps to understand why Joe Pesci chose silence at the end of his life, we have to start from where he first learned to endure it. A small barbershop in Newark, New Jersey, where time passed with the rhythmic snip of scissors and the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. There, in the 1940s, when America was still covered in the dust and fatigue of the post-war years, little Joe was born and raised in a cramped rental house with his parents. His father, Angelo, worked as a forklift operator by day and a bartender by night. His mother, Maria, was a diligent hairdresser whose hands trembled slightly from overwork. The family, of Italian descent from the Turin region, had crossed the ocean in search of a better life, but ended up barely surviving from week to week on their modest earnings. In that tight space, Joe had no toys, nor any dreams beyond watching his mother work. When he was 5, while the neighborhood boys played baseball outside, young Pesci sat quietly in the corner of the shop, watching hair fall onto the tile floor, listening to his mother's polite laughter as her tired eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He understood very early that life was a repetitive cycle of work for survival, and that if he ever wanted to escape it, he would have to find something different. His mother was the first to notice the spark in her son. Every evening, she would turn on the radio so he could imitate the voices from the drama shows. When Joe was 5, she took him by the hand to New York to audition for a children's music group. He was chosen, not because he sang well, but because of the strangely serious look in his eyes. By the age of 10, Joe had become a familiar face on the television program StarTime Kids, singing and dancing alongside Connie Francis, while many kids his age still struggled to write their own names properly. But the stage was never a place for childhood. Throughout the 1950s, Joe grew up between two worlds. By day, he attended school. By night, he performed, rehearsed lines, and danced in oversized costumes and shoes that pinched his feet. He had to smile when he didn't want to, be cheerful when he was tired, and act mature just to stay on screen. The weight of adult expectations pressed down on a boy barely in his teens, teaching Pesci early that success is never free, and the first price you pay is innocence. When the show ended, he returned to Belleville, a smoky industrial town, and once again sat in his mother's barbershop, where the sound of scissors mixed with the whistle of winter wind seeping through the door cracks. He didn't know it then, but that very sound, that monotonous, melancholic rhythm, would become the background score of his entire life. Joe Pesci's teenage years were spent caught between dream and reality. On one side, the dazzling stage where he was forced to shine. On the other, the suffocating little room where he learned to endure. At 15, when most boys began to dream about the future, Joe only knew he had to work at any cost. From that poverty, exhaustion, and solitude, a great actor was forged, not to play heroes, but to embody the wounded souls that the world would never forget. When the 1960s arrived, Joe Pesci carried within him a restless energy, part ambition, part obsession to escape poverty. The childhood stage had given him a touch of fame, but no future, so he turned to music as his way out. With a guitar in hand, Pesci wandered through the smoky clubs of New York and New Jersey, where the air was thick with the scent of cigarettes, cheap beer, and chaotic laughter. He joined the band Joey D and the Starlighters, known for their hit Peppermint Twist, and began touring across the Northeast. For the first time since his days as a child performer, he felt like he truly belonged on a stage. In those cramped, noisy nights, Pesci learned more than just music. He learned how to read people, when to hold a rhythm, when to pause, when to explode. Those years forged his sense of timing and stage instinct, a rhythm that would later make him a performer whose heartbeat matched the beat of the scene. Every line and every glance carrying its own tempo. But as always, music and life never came easily to him. In 1968, Joe released his debut solo album, Little Joe Sure Can Sing, under the stage name Joe Ritchie. The record, a mix of pop and soul covers, was a desperate yet earnest attempt by an artist trying to prove he could be more than a background player. But when it came out, no one noticed. Sales were almost non-existent. No radio play. No press. The album disappeared from stores as if it had never existed. For Pesci, it was a painful blow, not just financially, but spiritually. He realized that his voice wasn't loud enough to be heard in a world already too noisy. Yet from that failure, he learned the most important lesson: how to fail without losing his rhythm. When music slammed the door shut, Pesci refused to step away from the stage. He turned to comedy, teaming up with Frank Vincent, a drummer and musician who would later become his fated co-star in Goodfellas and Casino. Together, they formed the act Vincent and Pesci, performing in small clubs around New York, New Jersey, and even Philadelphia. They played through clouds of cigarette smoke, to the bitter laughter of drunk audiences, and nights when their pay barely covered gas to get home. In those shabby rooms, Joe Pesci mastered the art of survival, how to control his breath, his rhythm, his reaction to every tiny sound in the room. He learned that audiences don't just listen, they feel energy. And that very instinct would define his later film career, where a single flicker of his eyes could make viewers tense without knowing why. By 1975, Pesci and Vincent landed what seemed like their big break, a Broadway show titled The New Vaudevillians. It was the dream of every stage actor. But it lasted only 1 week. Tickets didn't sell, critics were brutal, and the show was quietly shut down. After the final performance, Joe Pesci walked across the glowing lights of Times Square, feeling as though the brightness was mocking him. That winter, he returned to the Bronx, where he'd grown up, and took a job at a small Italian restaurant called Amicis. The man who had once been on television at age 10 was now clearing tables, polishing glasses, and counting tip money to get by. Dinner guests had no idea their waiter had once sung on Broadway, recorded an album, and dreamed of being an artist. But Pesci knew, and that knowledge made him sit up at night staring at his hands, unsure whether they were meant to play guitar, hold a microphone, or just wipe down tables. It was the lowest point of his life, the pause between two beats, where the lights had gone out and every dream seemed out of breath. But in that darkness, Joe Pesci unknowingly prepared himself for the greatest comeback of his life. One that would transform him from a forgotten waiter into a storm that would shake Hollywood. As fate always does, it arrived at the exact moment he had given up hope. In 1976, at nearly 33 years old and convinced his career was over, Joe accepted a small part in a low-budget crime film called The Death Collector. It was a local project, rushed, dimly lit, crudely written, and poorly paid. But to Pesci, it was a final farewell to the stage, a last chance to do something meaningful. He didn't try to impress anyone, didn't perform for fame. He simply acted with the raw instinct honed from years of reading crowds in smoky bars, from nights spent singing to drunks who'd never remember his name. That honesty changed everything. A copy of The Death Collector somehow reached Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese, who were then searching for a fresh face for Raging Bull. They saw in Pesci something Hollywood could never manufacture, a raw, street-born intensity mixed with the fragility of a man who had failed too many times to pretend anymore. Without any formal audition, Pesci was offered the role of Joey LaMotta, the loyal yet volatile brother of legendary boxer Jake LaMotta. It wasn't just a role. It was the resurrection of a man the world had forgotten. On the Raging Bull set in 1979, Joe Pesci worked like someone gambling with the rest of his life. He wasn't afraid to clash, to bleed, to be wrong. During one fight scene between the brothers, Robert De Niro, caught up in the moment, accidentally broke Pesci's rib. The crew wanted to cut the scene, but Scorsese kept it, because that pain, that authenticity, was exactly what he was searching for. A wound that couldn't be faked. When Raging Bull premiered in 1980, every year of struggle, every failure, and every lonely night Pesci had endured poured out through Joey LaMotta's eyes. A brother who loved and hated, protected and destroyed, the kind of character only someone who had lived with contradiction could play. The film became a masterpiece, and Joe Pesci was no longer a supporting player. He was the film's second heartbeat. He won the BAFTA Award for Best Supporting Actor and earned his first Oscar nomination, opening the door he thought had closed forever. But with success came a new kind of prison, the one built by that very success. After Raging Bull, Hollywood realized Joe Pesci possessed something raw and uncontrollable, a primal instinct, a mix of danger and humor, of laughter and sudden violence. Directors adored that authenticity and then began to trap him within it. From that moment on, Pesci wasn't just famous, he was branded. The mafia edge, the street heat, the volatile temper became an invisible cage that shaped how Hollywood would see him for decades. And as the lights shone brighter, Pesci began to sense another kind of darkness forming. The darkness of a man loved for the very thing he had once tried to escape. After Raging Bull, the road ahead of Joe Pesci seemed lit once again. But unlike many who flare up and fade away, he moved forward with the instinct of a man who knew what it meant to lose everything. Entering the 1980s, Pesci became the trusted collaborator in the legendary trio with Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro, a creative triangle that, with each reunion, offered a new slice of guilt, loyalty, and madness. In 1984, he appeared in Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, a role so small his name barely flickered in the credits, yet his few minutes on screen were unforgettable. Those knife-cold eyes amid a world of gangsters steeped in nostalgia and ruin. Pesci didn't need many lines. A single glance or the right pause could turn a side character into the silent soul of the frame. During the mid-decade, Pesci tried to break free from his typecast image with Easy Money, 1983, and Eureka, 1983. Two entirely different films. One a dark comedy about middle-class greed, the other a mystical meditation on fate, yet both proved Pesci was more than rage or violence. He could swing from fierce to funny, stern to manic in a single beat. Critics called it rare versatility. Pesci called it instinct, simply living truthfully in every moment. The true turning point came with Lethal Weapon 2, 1989, Hollywood's blockbuster action franchise. Amid the hyper-masculine world of cops, guns, and car chases, Pesci introduced something different. Leo Getz, a petty, fast-talking, irritating, yet strangely lovable hustler. The character made mainstream audiences, who only knew him as a cold-blooded killer, see a new side of him, funny, sharp, and alive like a burst of jazz. Lethal Weapon catapulted Pesci to commercial stardom. Audiences adored him, box offices hailed him, studios chased him. Yet behind the laughter, Pesci knew the cost. The more popular he became, the more he was forced into playing the same Pesci type, quick-tempered, reckless, unpredictable. Each role became a battle between his artistry and the industry's urge to turn him into a formula. The 1980s ended in dazzling light, money, fame, and roaring laughter on the big screen. But somewhere within the noise, between the gunshots and rapid-fire dialogue, Pesci began to hear a familiar sound, the quiet snip of scissors from his mother's old barbershop, a reminder that no matter how loudly the world cheered, he was still the boy from Newark who had learned to survive in silence. Then came 1990, the fateful year that turned Joe Pesci from a great actor into a living legend. In Goodfellas, Martin Scorsese cast him as Tommy DeVito, a small, fast-talking gangster, laughing one second, killing the next. It wasn't just a performance. It was Pesci's raw essence unleashed, as wild and dangerous as the streets of Belleville that shaped him. The iconic, "You think I'm funny?" scene wasn't even in the script. Pesci improvised it from a real-life memory, when he'd nearly been beaten to death by a mobster for making the wrong joke. That razor-thin line between humor and violence became one of the most unforgettable moments in cinema history. The role sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Tommy DeVito was chaos incarnate, terrifying yet tragic, a man driven by insecurity and rage, always ready to erupt. Pesci didn't act for applause. He relived his own fury. When his name was called at the 1991 Oscars, Joe walked up, spoke only 5 words. "It's my privilege. Thank you." And left. No theatrics, no long speech. Just 5 words that became legend. It was exactly how he lived, ferocious on screen, humble in life, never a wasted word. That same year, Pesci did what no one expected. He made the world laugh. In Home Alone, 1990, and Home Alone 2, 1992, he played Harry, the bumbling burglar, violent, clumsy, and darkly hilarious. Here, violence became slapstick, every fall, burn, and blow delivered with the precision of a musician. Home Alone grossed over $500 million worldwide, and Pesci earned $4.5 million, a record sum for a comedy actor at the time. But beyond the money, he proved that the man who once terrified audiences could just as easily make them laugh. By the mid-1990s, Pesci seemed to be everywhere. He appeared in Oliver Stone's JFK, 1991, haunting and enigmatic, then transformed into a sharp, street-smart lawyer in My Cousin Vinny, 1992, earning critical acclaim and confirming what few could match: his ability to move seamlessly between drama and comedy. Pesci had become both an artist's actor and a crowd favorite, a balance almost no one achieves. Then fate reunited him with Scorsese and De Niro once more in Casino, 1995. His character Nicky Santoro, a brutal, loyal, unhinged mob enforcer, was a darker, older reflection of Tommy DeVito. During a violent fight scene, Pesci fell and re-broke the same rib he'd fractured in Raging Bull 15 years earlier. but he kept filming until the director called cut. The scene stayed in the final film, a living testament to his devotion to the craft. From Raging Bull to Casino, Joe Pesci had completed the circle, from hunger to glory. Yet, inside, the brilliance, exhaustion crept in. The roles began to blur. The same shouting, swearing, explosive men. It was as if Hollywood only wanted the template Pesci they'd built. By the late 1990s, he tried to break free again with comedies like Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag, 1997, and Gone Fishin', 1997. Both were savaged by critics. They said he was parodying himself, turning the rage that once made him legendary into a joke. That was the moment Joe Pesci realized Hollywood no longer needed him as an artist, only as a caricature of himself. And for a man who had bled, broken bones, and risked his dignity to be taken seriously, that was the deepest humiliation of all. In 1998, Joe Pesci made a surprising return in Lethal Weapon 4, the final installment of the action franchise that had brought him to mainstream audiences nearly a decade earlier. At first, the script had no place for Leo Getz, but the studio and director realized that audiences still craved that fast-talking, jittery energy only Pesci could bring. He was written in at the last minute and paid one of the highest salaries of the time. Though his screen time was short, every time Leo Getz opened his mouth, the audience burst into laughter. Pesci still had that masterful sense of rhythm, comic timing, and the ability to breathe life into what might otherwise have been filler scenes. But behind the laughter, fatigue was beginning to take root. After nearly 2 decades of high-intensity work, moving constantly between crime dramas and comedies, Pesci began to feel his own limits. Each shoot, each press junket, each new offer made him feel like he was being replicated. The sting of Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag and Gone Fishin' still lingered, and every new script felt like a duller copy of what he'd already done best. It was a cycle with no exit. Hollywood wanted only the Pesci it already knew, while he longed to disappear before becoming a parody of himself. And so, in 1999, at the age of 56, Joe Pesci announced his retirement from acting, indefinitely. The decision stunned Hollywood. A recent Oscar winner and box office draw simply walking away without complaint, only because he felt it was time. For Pesci, it wasn't giving up, it was self-preservation. In one of his few later interviews, he explained, "I didn't want to lose myself just to do one more role. Art had once saved him from poverty, but now it was slowly consuming what little of himself remained." In the years that followed, Joe Pesci turned back to music, the first love of his youth. He released the album Vincent LaGuardia Gambini Sings Just For You, inspired by his quick-witted lawyer character from My Cousin Vinny. The record mixed jazz, pop, swing, and a touch of satire, not for commercial success, but for the simple joy of singing, playing, and being himself. Critics were lukewarm, but the album proved that Pesci had never truly abandoned art. He had simply changed stages. In 2006, after nearly 7 years of silence, Pesci appeared in The Good Shepherd, Robert De Niro's Cold War spy drama. It was a small part, few lines, but audiences instantly recognized that familiar gaze, the one that could make a whole scene heavy with unspoken tension. Yet Pesci never called it a comeback. It was, as he said, a gift to an old friend. By 2010, he took one more shot with Love Ranch, a film set in a legal brothel in Nevada. But this time, the magic didn't happen. The film was disjointed, his character underwritten, and Pesci later admitted he was unhappy with the result. It was a minor stumble, but also a quiet acknowledgement that Hollywood was no longer his home. During this period, Joe Pesci lived in near-complete seclusion, appearing only at the occasional concert or small event. He avoided the media. No social networks, no talk shows, no noise. The world gradually forgot his image on the screen. But that silence only deepened his mystique, a legend who vanished at his brightest moment, so his light would never fade. As the stage lights dimmed for good, Joe Pesci returned to an ordinary life. One without directors or applause, only real connections, often more fragile than any dangerous scene he'd ever filmed. Back in the 1960s, when he was still a thin young man playing guitar in New Jersey bars, Pesci believed love could save him from the loneliness and the cold cigarette smoke that followed every performance. It was during one such small gig, under a dim yellow light, that he met the first woman to enter his life, the one who would become his first wife. Her name has long vanished from public record, but to Pesci, she was the light at the end of the hallway. He was barely in his 20s then, with nothing but an old guitar, a few unrecorded songs, and a fragile dream of the big stage. They fell in love simply, amid poverty and uncertain promises. The marriage took place around 1964. A small ceremony with no celebrities, no press, just a handful of relatives and a modest toast with cheap wine. In the beginning, it was the purest happiness Pesci had ever known. He earned money from small gigs. She worked an office job. They lived in a tiny apartment in Newark, where train whistles and factory smoke framed their modest dream, to love each other and get through each month. But as the bills piled up and his musical prospects dimmed, love began to feel like a burden. Pesci would come home late from bar shows, while his young wife waited in silence, unsure if they'd have enough to pay the next electric bill. The harder he clung to his artistic dreams, the further he drifted from domestic life. Financial strain, constant failure, and the loneliness of two young people trying to survive eroded their bond faster than they realized. Joe loved his wife, but he loved art with a kind of obsession, and in the end, that very obsession cost him both. The marriage ended quietly. No drama, no scandal, just two people recognizing they no longer shared the same road. After the separation, Pesci never spoke of it again. He buried himself in work, as if constant motion could outrun the emptiness inside. But from that heartbreak, he carried something that would never leave him. The loneliness, the hunger, the feeling of being left behind. And it was from those wounds that his greatest performances would later emerge, for only someone who had truly lost everything could so vividly embody the broken souls the world would never forget. In the years following his first marriage, Joe Pesci lived quietly, avoiding all questions about his private life. He poured all his energy into acting, as if only work could help him forget the emptiness that remained. But after nearly 2 decades of solitude spent inhabiting brutal characters, a woman unexpectedly stepped into his life and gave him something he thought he had lost forever: the feeling of belonging. In 1988, at a time when his fame was soaring after Raging Bull and Goodfellas, Pesci met Claudia Haro, a young, beautiful, warm model and actress whose gaze made him feel safe amid the noise of Hollywood. They met at a mutual friend's party, where Pesci, who rarely laughed, made an exception, telling stories that had everyone at the table in stitches. To Claudia, this small, fast-talking man, with his frown and habit of standing off to the side, carried a strange kind of magnetism, a mixture of experience, humor, and a deep loneliness she sensed immediately. Their love came quickly, fiercely, and unexpectedly. Pesci, then in his 40s, was seasoned and guarded. Claudia, just in her 20s, was starting out with a few minor roles. Despite their nearly 20-year age gap, they found in each other a complementary opposite. He found trust. She found support. They married that same year in a private ceremony in California. No reporters, no flashing cameras, only close friends and a simple promise. Not to leave each other no matter how life turns. At first, it was one of the rarest happy periods in Joe Pesci's life. Their small house in Los Angeles was filled with laughter. When their daughter Tiffany was born, Pesci seemed to change completely. The man accustomed to on-screen blood and violence now learned to mix formula, change diapers, and lull his child to sleep with jazz tunes. Neighbors recalled how every morning Pesci would take his daughter out onto the porch, sipping coffee while softly humming. A simple, peaceful image almost impossible to reconcile with his movie gangster persona. Claudia told friends she had never seen him smile so much. But happiness in Joe Pesci's world never lasted long. The more famous he became, the less he was home. Constant shoots from Los Angeles to Las Vegas to New York slowly eroded the family. Claudia stayed home alone with their child, while Pesci, despite loving them deeply, didn't know how to balance work and home. Phone calls became less frequent, shared dinners rarer. The man who once said he wanted to be a normal person was pushed by fame away from the very life he longed for. By the early 1990s, those small cracks had widened into an unbridgeable distance. They argued over things that seemed trivial: shooting schedules, money, time with their daughter. Claudia wanted him to rest. Pesci was haunted by the fear of being forgotten. When Casino came out, the press saw only the ferocious Joe Pesci on screen, but few knew that behind the scenes he was exhausted from playing two roles at once, one for the audience and one for his family. The marriage ended in 1992, quietly. No one announced a reason, no scandals, no accusations, just a man walking out the door and a woman standing there holding their child. Pesci was granted custody of Tiffany, believing he could better shield her from Hollywood's chaos. But in truth, he never fully recovered from the pain. For Claudia, the love didn't simply disappear. It became a memory, tangled in gratitude and regret. Yet the tragedy didn't end there. A few years after the divorce, Claudia Haro married stuntman Garrett Warren. In 2000, Warren was shot multiple times outside his home and miraculously survived. The investigation revealed Claudia's involvement, and the case shocked Hollywood. She was arrested, convicted of attempted murder, and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Although Joe Pesci was completely uninvolved, his name was dragged into the media storm. Some tabloids fabricated claims that he was financing Claudia, allegations quickly disproven, but the wound to his reputation remained. What surprised people most was Pesci's response. Instead of condemning or distancing himself, he helped bail his ex-wife out with a sum, reportedly up to $125 million, an act no one expected. He offered no justification, no explanation. Perhaps deep down, he still remembered the woman who once made him believe life could be gentle. But the fallout shattered the family. Tiffany, then barely over 10, had to live with the reality of her mother in prison and her father worn down by scandal. Joe Pesci, who once terrified audiences with a single glare, became the quiet man who drove his daughter to school every morning, avoiding cameras, avoiding questions. That life was quiet to the point of eerie, because after all the roles and all the acclaim, the part he had to play most completely was that of a father who hid his pain. Perhaps from that point on, Joe Pesci understood that no script could be as merciless as real life. On screen, he could break bones and bleed, then get back up. In life, there is no cut that lets you start over. After the turbulent years with Claudia Haro, Joe Pesci was no longer the loud man of Hollywood. He closed himself off, living as if trying to erase his own footprints from the world that had once praised and wounded him. But time has its own way of testing people. When loneliness stretches on for too long, it sometimes opens the door to a second chance at love. Fragile, slow, and hard for anyone to believe in. In the late 1990s, when Pesci was in his 50s, he met a woman who gently stirred the heart he thought had turned numb. Angie Everheart, a supermodel and actress nearly 30 years his junior. They met at a charity event in Los Angeles, where Pesci showed up briefly, dragged along by friends. In that glittering crowd, he didn't quite fit. But when he saw Angie with her striking red hair and sincere smile, he felt a rare sense of calm. For Angie, this small, soft-spoken man was unlike anyone else in her world. He was genuine, unpretentious, with eyes so sad they made you want to stay just to ease them. They began dating quietly. Pesci had tasted exposure and knew how easily it shattered things under the media's gaze. The two often escaped the city for small seaside towns in New Jersey where he'd once lived, or went golfing. Simple pleasures Pesci had cherished for years. Angie, a model used to flashes and red carpets, slowly learned to love his quietness. Pesci, in turn, learned to open his heart once more. In 2000, after 4 years together, they got engaged. The press called it one of Hollywood's most unlikely romances, a 57-year-old man and a supermodel in her prime. But for those who knew Pesci, it made sense. He had never lived by anyone's rules. The man who terrified audiences on screen became gentle and cautious when it came to marriage. He wanted a calm beginning, without spectacle, without fame dictating their bond. Yet, as with the 2 times before, fate seemed unwilling to grant him lasting happiness. The engagement stretched on for 8 years and never became a wedding. Angie was still fully immersed in show business, while Pesci had withdrawn completely, choosing to live apart from it all. They gradually realized they were moving at different speeds. She wanted to keep flying. He just wanted to stay still. Small differences in lifestyle, work schedules, environments, habits slowly widened into distance. In 2008, they broke up quietly. No accusations, no dramatic headlines. Angie simply said, "We still care about each other." Pesci, as always, stayed silent and disappeared from view. For him, it was more than just another breakup. It was the final confirmation that love, in his world, always arrived a beat too late and left a step too soon. After that, Joe Pesci withdrew completely. He bought a small house by the New Jersey shore, spending most of his time playing golf, listening to jazz, and occasionally jamming with old friends. He never married again, never appeared on red carpets with anyone, never gave the world another hand-in-hand photograph. People say Joe Pesci is one of the rare Hollywood actors who chose solitude as a way of life, not because he feared love, but because he understood that love, like art, is only truly beautiful when it isn't forced to perform. And perhaps in those quiet afternoons by the sea, where the sound of the waves blends with his guitar, he finally found what neither fame nor marriage ever gave him: peace within himself. After nearly 2 decades of silence, Joe Pesci seemed to have left the world of cinema for good. But in 2019, his name suddenly resurfaced, not in a light-hearted comedy, but in The Irishman, a film regarded as the elegy of the mafia era on screen. Martin Scorsese, his longtime friend and creative partner, persuaded him to return after years of rejecting dozens of scripts. At first, Pesci refused. He was content with his quiet life by the New Jersey shore, playing golf, strumming his guitar, and staying far away from press conferences and noisy sets. But Scorsese knew one thing. Only Pesci possessed the kind of silence that could convince the world that real power never needs to shout. In The Irishman, he transformed into Russell Bufalino, a calm, calculating mob boss whose quietness was more terrifying than any outburst. No yelling, no weapons, just a look, a gentle tone of voice, and Pesci could make the audience hold their breath. He was no longer the hot-headed maniac from Goodfellas, but a weary elder who understood that silence can be deadlier than gunfire. His performance astonished critics. It was as if Pesci had never left, merely waited for the right moment to remind Hollywood that true talent never needs noise. The role earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor, alongside Al Pacino and longtime collaborator Robert De Niro, three legends sharing one frame. But unlike the 1990s, this time, Pesci gave no speeches, no interviews, no publicity tours. He simply appeared, delivered his performance with precision, and vanished again, just as he had lived all these years. That same year, Pesci released the album Pesci, Still Singing, a collection of jazz and swing tunes that felt like a quiet note to the world. Music had never left his life. His warm, gravelly voice carried the weight of time, the sound of a soul that once burned bright and slowly dimmed. Pitchfork wrote, "Pesci doesn't sing to impress. He sings as if he's talking to his memories." And perhaps that's what he had always done, turn every role, every note, into a conversation with himself. After The Irishman, Joe Pesci disappeared from Hollywood's radar once more. This time, for good. No red carpets, no interviews, no more roles that drained his strength. He divided his life between two worlds he had built himself. A seaside mansion in Lavallette, New Jersey, worth around $5 million, and a quiet home in California, where he spent his time making music and playing golf. Each place reflected a side of him, one that once blazed under the spotlight, and one that longed to dissolve into the sound of waves. Every morning he rises early, brews coffee, and sits on his porch watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. No housekeepers, no commotion, just the waves and faint jazz playing from an old speaker. When the weather's warm, he heads out to the golf course, still maintaining a 16 handicap, enough to compete in small charity tournaments. Friends say Pesci always leaves right after his final putt. No parties, no boasting. He calls it an exercise in stillness. In the afternoons, he returns home, picks up his old guitar, the same one he played in Bronx bars decades ago, and strums the blues, sometimes humming "Got to Get You Into My Life," a song he recorded back in the 1960s. In that quiet room, music may be the most faithful companion he has left. Though reclusive, Joe Pesci maintains close friendships with Robert De Niro, his professional brother. They still talk on the phone, occasionally play golf or share lunch at a small restaurant in Tribeca. He also keeps in touch with Home Alone co-star Daniel Stern and occasionally appears in small artistic projects, like the 2023 series Bupkis, where he played Pete Davidson's grandfather, a performance both funny and touching, proving that even in old age, Pesci's spark still flickers in his eyes. His net worth is estimated at around $50 million, much of it from film royalties and quiet investments. Yet Pesci has never lived lavishly. He donates a large portion to charities such as the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, the Red Cross Golf Classic, and the Melanoma Research Foundation, often anonymously or through intermediaries. For him, kindness doesn't need an audience. His only real indulgence is classic cars. In his garage sit the metallic witnesses of each era of his life. A 1960s Lincoln Continental recalling his bar-singing days, a Mercedes Maybach S-Class symbolizing his years of stardom, and a few Italian sports cars he gifted himself after unforgettable roles. Each car is meticulously maintained but rarely driven. They exist like memories forged in steel, silent and enduring, just like their owner. Now, at 82, Joe Pesci carries himself like a man who no longer needs to prove anything. He spends most of his time with his daughter, Tiffany, the one person he calls the reason I never look back. They often go out for dinner, catch live music, or simply sit together on the porch listening to the sea. Today, between his two homes and two worlds, one of memories, one of the present, Joe Pesci no longer plays the killer, the clown, or the rebel. He is simply a father, an aging artist savoring the peace he spent a lifetime fighting to earn. The world once trembled at his glare on screen. Now, all that remains is a gentle look that seems to say, I fought my whole life for art. Now I just want quiet. The legacy Joe Pesci leaves behind isn't measured in numbers or awards. It lies in how he redefined the very essence of acting. In a Hollywood that worships glamour, he chose silence. In an era where stars want to shout their stories to the world, he spoke instead through his eyes, through the pauses between words, through a ruthless precision in every gesture. In Joe Pesci, one finds something rare, the art of restraint, where everything unnecessary is stripped away until only truth remains. Throughout his career, he appeared in just over 30 films, yet every role was a milestone. From Joey LaMotta in Raging Bull to Tommy DeVito in Goodfellas, Nicky Santoro in Casino, and Russell Bufalino in The Irishman. 4 decades, 4 faces of the same soul. Fierce, lonely, loyal, and real. No other actor could make audiences terrified, laugh out loud, and then sit in silence long after the credits rolled. Pesci achieved this not through technique, but instinct. An instinct born from the hard years in Newark, from smoky cabaret stages, and from wounds he never revealed. He wasn't just the legendary gangster of American cinema, but a symbol of a generation of actors who didn't need to speak loudly to leave a mark. Greats like Scorsese and De Niro have admitted no one acts like Pesci because he doesn't act, he lives. And that very living, raw, natural, instinctive made him a singular presence in modern film history. A supporting actor whose influence stands shoulder to shoulder with the biggest stars. And you, when the lights go out, will you choose to keep standing in the spotlight or quietly step down to find the peace you've been searching for all your life? If Joe Pesci's story touched you, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join us as we continue exploring the lives that once blazed brightly and chose to disappear at their most brilliant moment.